So let's get the ball rolling. I'll start with a quick welcome. Tēnā koutou, nau mai, haere mai, ki tēnei hui. Hello and welcome everyone to this stop on the Friends of Figma World Tour. This exciting event is traveling the globe in only 24 hours, going from one Friends of Figma community to the next. And through this event, we can celebrate the diversity of design all around the world and share our local experiences. Your hosts on this stop of the tour are myself, Rachel Radford, Roxy Huntington, and Hayden King. We organise our local community events, wind, rain or shine, bringing together a broad audience through formal and informal style events. So thank you. The Auckland session on sustainability and design was really insightful conversation, but now we've gone from one end of the North Island to the next, and here we are in Pōneke, Wellington at the south end. A small but mighty and very windy city, Wellington is the capital and creative hub of the country, and it is also the home of the studio that made Lord of the Rings, and Wellington is also home to many notable startups, including the headquarters for accounting software Xero, which coincidentally is where our speaker this evening works. Jon moved to Wellington from the US 7 years ago, boasting a wealth of experience from working at Frog Design, on the Windows Phone, and at Twitter, now known as X. Jon is now a principal product designer at Xero and an active member of the Friends of Figma Wellington community, where he engages the designers in our community with his storytelling. And so we are very excited for him to share his stories wider tonight. He'll be talking about stepping out of your comfort zone and learning to keep an open, curious mind. So a reminder that we will have a question and response time after Jon's talk. So note down any questions that you have and feel free to add those into the Q&A feature, which should be at the bottom bar of your window there. We're giving away a Figma store gift card to the value of $50 to the best question as chosen by Jon. So let's get started. Over to you, Jon.
All right, thanks, Rach. All right, so yeah, the name of this talk is The Future Favors the Curious. Thank you very much all for coming. Now, quick note, I got the title of this talk from a blog post about AI, and it's by a guy named Mike Davidson. I used to work for him at Twitter. Really great blog post about AI. I highly recommend that you read it, but this talk is not about that blog post. It's about being wrong, and it's about trying to be less wrong. I want to take you back to 2009. iPhone had been out for 2 years. App Store had been out for 1 year. AT&T comes to Frog Design and says, what's the future of music? That's the brief. We want to know what the future of music is. So we got a bunch of data. And I remember I looked at some of the data and I just sort of dismissed it because some of the data said kids like listening to music on YouTube. And I was like, no, they don't. And I just sort of thought like, people love paying $1 per song on the iTunes store. And people love spending $10 per album. I just dismissed it. But I had been witnessing an emergent trend, and I was sort of, I didn't allow myself to see it. And as the months went by, I thought, well, I don't want that to happen again. I want to get better at listening. And in a really nerdy way, I sort of made it this mission. Like, I'm just going to go talk to random people and actually listen to them to try to get better at this. And so I started by walking down the street to the Dianetics and Scientology Life Improvement Center. Anyone that knows Seattle knows that right down there where the monorail is, about a block away, there's the Scientology Center. So I walked in. I'm not a Scientologist. I'm not interested in being a Scientologist, but I walked in. I'm like, hi, I'm a designer, and I'm trying to get better at interviewing. Can I ask you some questions? So they send me downstairs. And there's a guy there, said, hey, I don't want to waste your time because you're not going to convert me, but like, can we talk? And he said, yes. And we had a great chat. And one of the things that jumped out at me in these sort of 75 minutes was, he said at one point, like, look, I know everybody thinks it's a cult. I know nobody likes Scientology. I get it. But his point was like, look, I was experiencing some issues. I had some anger issues. I had some anxiety. All I know is I read this book. It helped me feel better. And I'm just trying to help other people feel better. And that really humanized it for me. Another thing that was very humanizing is early on, he was talking about not sweating the small stuff. So a little bit later, maybe 45 minutes later, the walls vibrated. And he got mad. He was like, I hate the light rail. I hate the bus system, because there's tunnels that shake the walls of his office. And when he got frustrated, I said, remember, don't sweat the small stuff. And he was like, you got me, touche, that's awesome, which I always thought was quite endearing. But it wasn't just talking to Scientologists, of course. I was spending a lot of time at work, just asking questions. And one bit of advice that someone gave me was, look, when you're about to work with someone on a project, don't wait for the kickoff meeting. You should take them to coffee and you should sit down and you should ask questions like this. How do you like to work? And then they say stuff and then you take down notes. That evolved into, hey, can you describe your perfect designer? Because like, I'm about to be your designer for the next 3 weeks on this program. And I'm just curious, like, what do you look for in a designer? An interesting thing happens. A lot of people can't think of perfect, but they can sort of reverse a bad experience. So you'll see them saying things like, yeah, I like it when designers communicate with me more often. And you sort of know like, oh gosh, okay, they had a bad experience. I will try to remember to communicate more often. This evolved into me sending out an email to the Frog design team, not just the design team though, the entire studio. And I said, hey, can you fill in this sentence? I wish designers blank. And I got all this feedback. And in fact, it was such great feedback. I've been doing this now for a long time. I've gotten hundreds of responses to this. And the word that's the most common when you ask people, I wish designers, blah, the word that's the most common is the word willing. I wish my designer was willing to invite engineers earlier onto the design process. I wish they were willing to learn more about the business or learn more about technical debt and the limitations there, willing to explain their thinking when they get to a conclusion. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, if the number one word I'm hearing is willing, whew, that's not good. Like I have to work on that. I have to see more open-minded because gosh, this is not a great reputation. But it wasn't all just talking to my coworkers. I went to Jamba Juice to get a smoothie, and I walked up to the guy and I said, hey, I'd like a bright-eyed and blueberry. He goes off in the corner, he starts making it. It's really loud. And I made the mistake of trying to talk to him while it was still too loud. And so I'm like, hey, I'm a designer. I was just wondering. He can't hear anything. So he comes over to me, pours the smoothie, asks what I was asking. I said, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a designer. I was just wondering, like, I'm trying to get better at like asking people questions. It's kind of awkward. I was just wondering, like, what would you like change about like the world if you could? And he gives me this look like, sir, this is a Wendy's. This was like not an appropriate question for Jamba Juice. But an interesting thing happened, and I've seen this happen over and over. At the beginning of a user interview, especially an impromptu one like I did, people will often downplay their own experience. Like, I don't know, I have a pretty boring life. I don't know, I don't have much to say. But when they look over at you and they see that you genuinely care and you're like, go on, and you actually are there with them, people have a lot of opinions. Sometimes they just sort of need permission. So this guy got on a roll. He was like, okay, these oranges, they're right here, but they should really be over there. And he goes on this like long thing about like all the ways he would change Jamba Juice. And I don't remember the details, but I remember his passion and how he started not really having much to say. But when he noticed that I was actually curious and I wanted to know, he really went somewhere with it. A few months later, I was in an airport and I saw these airline gate agents. It's two women, maybe in their 40s or 50s. They're over at a gate and I walk over to them and I say, hey, I have kind of a weird question. I'm a designer. I was just wondering if I could like ask you questions about your job. I'm trying to get better at asking questions. And one looks me dead in the eyes and just deadpans, our job is perfect. We have nothing to report. And then they both laugh. And the second one goes, let's be honest with the kid. And so the first one's like, okay, well, so for starters, we're not allowed to go on break. I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, we're not allowed to go on break. I was like, well, that sounds illegal. They're like, oh, it's really illegal. They said, the issue is, of course, we technically are allowed to take a break, but we have 2 hours of work to do in about a 45-minute chunk of time. There's just not enough time. And when you don't go on break, that means you don't eat. It also means you don't go to the bathroom. And if you don't go to the bathroom, you actually get health issues from that. We also have these high heels that we have to wear, this like certain outfit. The whole thing, it actually causes health issues. I thought, gosh, that's terrible. Then I made a mistake that a lot of people make in design research, but also just being a man. I tried solving their problem, which they were not asking for. And I said, well, would it help you if we, those boards behind you that like help show things? And they're like, we hate those signs. I'm like, why do you hate the signs? They said the signs have made our lives miserable because before the signs behind us, we would be working on our computer and people would be moving up and down on the list, right? And it's all on our screen and no one can see what we're doing. But with the board, as soon as we make an edit to our list, everybody sees it behind us, and then they all march into the line and they want to argue their case because maybe they saw themselves number 7 in line and now they've dropped down to number 8 and they're afraid they're going to get kicked off the flight or whatever. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. It was a good example of staying curious, not necessarily solutionizing, and just like letting them explain what is going on. A while later, maybe 10 years ago, a guy was painting my house and I was talking to him about like, tell me about painting. And that didn't really go anywhere, but he's like, but I make documentaries. And I have a thing called sitting in the discomfort or sitting in the disagreement or something like that. And he said, I recently brought a bunch of Trump supporters and people that do not like Trump, and I brought them into a room and I gave them a bunch of rules. And I said, you are not allowed to roll your eyes, call people dumb, you're not allowed to interrupt them, et cetera, et cetera. And so in that moment, or, in that situation, a woman was asked to explain why she voted for Trump. And because everybody has a timer, they set a timer behind her head and they go, okay, you got 90 seconds. So they press the button, the timer starts running, and she goes, oh, I don't know. I don't support everything that he says. It's just that I grew up in a small town. And when I heard the things that he was saying about trying to help America, it just resonated. And I looked at Hillary's proposals and it just didn't resonate as much. And yeah, I guess that's it. And there was this awkward moment where the timer, she'd only gotten to like 12 seconds and the timer's just running. And he's like, do you have anything else you want to say? She's like, nope. So the timer just went. She didn't have anything more to say. A couple hours later, as they were all packing up, she asked everybody, hey, can I just say something? So they all gather around her. And she said, I want to thank everybody for letting me say my piece, because that was the first time anyone's ever let me get 12 seconds in. She said, I didn't know that that's all I had to say. All I know is every time I start saying this, people attack me and then I'm like getting all defensive. But today was the first day I realized how little I have to say about this, man. It's only about 12 seconds worth, if only someone wouldn't interrupt me. A little while later, I was working at Twitter. And when I was at Twitter, we were working on trust and safety. So bad stuff, terrorism and harassment and blah, blah, blah. And there was a feature called mute keywords. Now, mute keywords is all over social media now, but at the time, it was actually kind of a revolutionary new idea that you could say, don't show me Game of Thrones spoilers. Don't show me, Severance spoilers. Or you could say, don't show me if the word politics comes up, for example. At the time, there was a great debate, like, should we use this feature or not? It seems kind of fiddly. The design team didn't like the idea that do people really want to go into their settings and set all these words and da-da-da? Or there's this belief that like, as soon as you have to make people customize their Twitter experience, we've done a bad job. We should just use AI to just always magically show amazing things and there should be no exceptions. But this country music person, I wasn't on the call, but I heard about it later. She's a country music star. And she said, well, they only call me 5 things, maybe 6. And that was such a big moment for the team. Like, we had this idea that people are going to have to, type, 200 things that they don't want to see. And she's like, nope, I've lived on this planet for a long time as a woman. There's 5, maybe 6 things that I need to block. And then she made the point that if I could not have to see those 5 or maybe 6 words, I could use Twitter like a man does, which was kind of the gold standard. A little bit later, this is another example of me being wrong. And, you try to stay curious, you try to stay humble, you try to keep, you try to not get stuck in your ways. But my product manager reached out to me and said, why can't I remove replies? I said, I don't understand what you're saying. And she said, like, if I write something on Twitter and then somebody says a mean thing, why do I have to let it stay there? I'm like, because you just do. And she's like, but why though? I'm like, I don't know. That's just what Twitter is. She's like, we can change what Twitter is. I'm like, I don't think I agree. And so we sort of went back and forth for a couple hours. I just wasn't getting it. To me, it just seemed like censorship or deleting someone's content or whatever. And she used this point. She said, look, if I say, I think Mario Kart is overrated, that's my content for my followers. So the idea that any old person can come up and kind of graffiti on the side of my tweet, and then I have to keep it there, that seems ridiculous. I should be able to keep my thing, but remove their thing. And we actually started to, eventually she won me over and we ended up doing it. It took 3 years to ship it. And it's the thing I'm the most proud of ever shipping. But it started with me not really getting it. And in fact, from that, we came up with the phrase, free speech, not free reach. meaning you're allowed to say what you want within policy, but you don't get to say something mean on someone's account that has 1 million followers just to get free visibility, which I thought was a really, really good turn to make. And now all social media does that. Now, here's a party trick. I don't do great with small talk, but when I go to a party, I love asking somebody what they do. And then I ask this question. I say, so you're a lawyer then. What's something that I would only know if I did your job? Not something that Hollywood taught me, not something that I've seen in a book. What would I only know if I were you? And there was a guy in Seattle at a house party. He goes, okay, good question. Yeah. Well, I'm an estate lawyer, right? So daddy dies and then brother and sister are fighting because the brother didn't get as much money and he's all mad. So now he's in my office and he's all upset and he's just, for an hour. At the end of that hour, here's the thing that you wouldn't know unless you're me. I am more of a therapist than a lawyer because they just have a lot of stuff to get off their chest. And so what I say at the end of that hour is, listen, Fred, I know you're upset. What I want you to do is I want you to go, I want you to put a dollar amount on the upset that you feel. Then I want you to honestly consider, would that money be better spent attacking your sister? Because I'll do it. Or would it be better spent on therapy? I just want you to think about it. And what he said was a week later, they come back, a larger percentage comes back and they say, hey, thanks, bud. You're totally right. I'm going to take a trip to Hawaii. I'm going to go to therapy. I appreciate the talk. I'm not going to proceed. But a smaller yet still large group, they come back and they're like, hey, buddy, I know where you're going with this, but sign me up. I've got $50,000 and I'm ready to attack my sister for $50,000 worth. And he's like, all right, let's write up the paperwork. And off they go. You can also do this for a location that someone is in. If somebody says, oh, I'm from Houston, or I'm from Maine, or I'm from Auckland, or whatever, just saying like, yeah, what's something that I would only know if I was from your hometown? Not something I'd see in Hollywood. So I asked this of somebody in Orlando. I've been to Orlando many times. My grandparents lived in Florida. I'm from the East Coast. I know the area well. So I said, well, what would I know if I was from Orlando? And he goes, okay, so John, here's the thing. There's 4 main Floridas. There's, of course, many Floridas, but there's 4 main Floridas. Here you go. Down in the South, that's when you think of like a Miami, right? You think of like Latino culture and like amazing food and, that sort of thing. So that's the southern part of the state. Northern part of the state, that's what, when you think of like the Deep South, that's the Panhandle. The Deep South has a real vibe, and that's the northern part. So that's the top and the bottom. Then on the east, you've got the nerds, the NASA engineers, the academics. And then on the west side of the state, you've got the corporations and the theme parks. And he goes, John, they all collide in my neighborhood in Orlando. And when you go to house parties, it's literally like representatives from these 4 versions of Florida all coming together. He's like, it's amazing. And that's why I love Orlando. It also works, this technique to being curious, it also works just like asking people in different stages of life. There's this guy who was the dad of my friend, and I've always looked up to him. Since 1998, I've sort of adopted him as a second dad. And so I asked him a little while ago, hey, do you have any suggestions for growing older? And he's like, yes. Here's the thing, John. When I was growing up, I listened to like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Bob Dylan. And that means if Bob Dylan comes into town, I'm going to go see Bob Dylan because that's my music. But when someone comes by and says, hey, you want to see a Kendrick Lamar show? He goes, John, I want to say no. Like, that's not my generation. That's not my genre. I want to say no. But what I've learned about getting older is just like forcing your brain into more of this play mindset where you're trying new things. That's really important to keep your brain nimble. And if you do go to that Kendrick Lamar show, you will realize that Kendrick Lamar is the new Bob Dylan, but you'd only know that if you keep an open mind. And that use of the word play really jumped out at me because in my career, I talk about play all the time. If you read the science of play, it shows that it's actually the best way to learn any new skill. You don't learn by someone like being mad at you and telling you perfection is the only thing. No, play is how bears learn how to hunt. It's how kids like bang their hands on, a piano to figure out what sounds good. Play is the way that we learn. And I thought it was notable that this guy who's older is still calling back to that. But speaking of older, I've started talking to kids about how my generation can help their generation. Imagine this, I'm at a house party about a year ago, and it was just the people on my street. So we all know each other. We're all neighbors. All our kids go to school together, small town. But I ended up at the kids' table. So instead of hanging out with all the adults, I'm over here with a 16-year-old and many of them. And I said to one person, hey, can you just give me some advice? Like, how can I help you? I'm in my 40s, you're 16. You know, the world is scary, right? We've got AI and war and climate change, and like, there's a lot going on. How can I help? And it turned into a 2-hour intergenerational summit. A bunch of kids got involved. People were like running to their homes to like get books to show me things. We're like looking at TikTok videos together. And we're like putting this whole theory together of everything. And I got to say, what these kids said to me basically broke down to this. Number one, we know it's going to be hard. So just admit that it's going to be hard. Their biggest pet peeve is when they are talking about what is making them scared, that adults keep saying like, oh, that's nothing. I lived through 1982. Oh, that's nothing. I lived through 1967. And her point was like, look, I get that there has been other challenges. It's just like, those don't feel as relevant to us. Can you just admit that it's going to be hard? Like, we get it. Can you just admit it? Like, stop gaslighting us. So that was the first one. Second one is, okay, once you admit it's going to be hard, just support us. That's it. Just support us. Just like understand that it's going to be hard and we need your support. And then the third one was, yeah, and we're going to surprise you. We're going to impress you. We're going to make you proud. She made the point that in World War II, that was a terrible time. We also got a lot of great inventions and a lot of great institutions, and there were a lot of great heroes. And there's a lot of amazing stuff that's going to happen very soon. We are very close to having an infinite energy source when we finally figure out nuclear fusion. That's actually going to mean infinite power with no pollution, which is going to fundamentally change the world. And this is the generation that's going to be able to sign their name to that. Or a cure for cancer would be another one. There's a lot of technological progress that we're right on the cusp of, and this is the generation that's going to get there. So again, to reiterate, admit that it's going to be hard and believe us, help us, and then sort of get out of the way because we're going to impress you. Now, I have a surprise about this talk. I actually had to rewrite this entire talk. This talk was going to be called The Next Generation of Designers. I was going to get up here and be like, hey, I'm in my 40s, and here are the things that we need to do better to help younger designers. We should do this and this and this. And I've been talking to the youth, and they're telling me the following things. That's what I was going to say. But I tried this talk on younger designers maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And there was a person sitting across the table from me, and she goes, oh, I think it's the reverse. I was like, what's the reverse? She goes, I don't think the youth are going to need help with a lot of this stuff. I think it's the adults that are going to need the help. She said, I'm on AI all day, every day, and people are still lecturing me about like, oh, it hallucinates. She's like, yeah, I know it hallucinates. I figured out the ways to use it well. I figured out ways to supercharge my work, like to do a good job at my job. Like, I'm good to go. It's the older generations that aren't saying yes to these new things. So they're the ones that are going to have more trouble. And then I had this flashback to the year 2000, where I had a tech job and my managers had nowhere near my technical expertise, and I kind of stood out. Or I think back to the 80s where I could work the VCR and my parents couldn't. And when she said that to me at that lunch, I realized, I don't think I want to give a talk about the next generation of designers anymore. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of anxiety out there. There's a lot of challenges. I'm not trying to say everyone's feeling groovy. Just pointing out that like, gosh, I think I have a lot more to learn from the next generation than they do from me. Just quite a humbling thought, which is what this talk is all about. So again, the reason I named this talk, The Future Favors the Curious, is like a lot of weird stuff's going on. And a lot of people have been pointing out how resilience is going to be the #1 skill of the future. You're just going to have to get good at saying yes and coming up with plan Bs. Like, that's just what it's going to be. That play mindset is going to be the main thing. And for me, I found that getting into that mindset, it just starts with listening better, goes into believing people when they say stuff, and maybe even changing your mind sometimes. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jon. That is fantastic. I'm just going to hop into the presentation now. Fantastic. Thank you for all those stories. They, yeah, there's some really quite touching ones in there. There's some funny ones. Absolutely fantastic. Now, in the spirit of curiosity, we're going to have a Q&A session. We've had a couple of questions come in already, but if you have any into the Q&A tab at the bottom and pop your question in there. There's a couple in there already, which you can upvote if you like. To start off with, for you to answer, Jon. And yeah, all the people online, please feel free to add your questions in there while Jon is answering this one. So the first question is from Kathy Ho. Hey Jon, have you got any handy tips for introverts or shy people to start these lovely small talk conversations that turn into deep, valuable conversations?
Absolutely. That is a fantastic question, Kathy. I don't have the guy's name in front of me right now, but he wrote a book called, I think it's like Designed for Introverts. And that's like his whole brand. So if you go on LinkedIn and you just do a search for like Design for Introverts, I actually got a chance to meet him. He's a lovely person. He has, it's like I said, it's a whole book. He has talks. Everything he says is amazing. The other thing that I would point out is that there's a book called Quiet. And it's a book about introverts. And it's great if there's someone in your life that maybe doesn't understand introversion as much. It's also great for yourself to read it and be like, oh, that makes sense. So that was a huge moment for me. I'm quite introverted. And I think one of the big insights in that book is that when you look at people's energy levels, introverts will like to say, oh, I just get so tired in social situations. And that's true. But when you take an introvert and you let them talk about something that they're interested in with one person, their energy levels are actually way higher even than extroverts, and for much longer. They can actually outlast extroverts on topics they care about. And so realizing that about myself, like I'm not shy, I'm just bad at small talk. And I want to go deeper. And you'll notice every one of these questions was me awkwardly walking up to someone in public and just being like, Jamba Juice guy. There's something really magical that happens when you get through that small talk and you get someone really talking. And frankly, I found that introverts are uniquely suited to it because I think we know how to get to those deeper questions. So great question, Kathy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jon. Rachel and I have had those conversations as well. One of us being introverted and one of us being extroverted. So a great example.
Yeah, true. I'm just going to hop in quickly. Jon, would you say that that's true then for one-on-one conversations, or do you find the same in kind of you're talking to a group?
I really struggle to talk to a group. I find it really hard. I need a handhold. If I can get talking to one person, I can talk for 5 hours and we can both have a great time. In a larger group, I'm lost. And so some advice I'd give anyone on the call who's not introverted, if you can structure situations where people are writing things down before they're being called on, and it's not just this like shooting from the hip situation, you're gonna get a lot more feedback. But a lot of school and a lot of work is based on this idea of, does anyone know the answer to this? And it's sort of this like rapid fire, like who can raise their hand the fastest? And what this book talks about is what you should do instead is you ask the question and then you say, cool, we're gonna talk about this in about 5 minutes. And that gives a chance for the introverts to like get going. And then you end up with a much deeper conversation with greater thought diversity. So yeah, groups can be tough.
Hot tip. It's kind of like the, write things down on a Post-it and then share it. It's something similar to that.
Exactly that.
Well, fantastic. Cool. So our second question is coming from Penny Yip. What are 3 key tips that you would advise to be able to attain trust, engagement, and interest in research? So 3 tips.
Yeah, so this is a good example of introvert mode. Like, because I haven't thought of this particular thing, you're gonna have to give me a second.
Fair.
I think what I have found for me, I think there is a sweet spot between being so formal and so reading from the script that you're kind of boring everyone. Like, hello, thank you for coming today. I'm gonna be asking you, just like that's not working, right? But then you've got the other extreme, which I tend to do, where I'm like, hey, and like, because there's no structure, it's a little shocking and people are kind of not really sure what's going on. And so I found like trying to blend the structure so people know this is going to happen at this point, and then this is going to happen at this point, like making sure that's clear, but hopefully not reading from a script is key. And then as soon as possible, I'm trying to get more of a human connection. So, you know, even to go back to the previous thing, even being able to drop something in like, you know, I'm more introverted. So, you know, for me, whatever, like trying to get to some human connection is something that's helped me. I also found when the iPad was brand new and like nobody had an iPad, my secret weapon when the iPad was brand new is I had an external keyboard on top of an iPad in an era where people were used to being interviewed like from behind a laptop. And so because I had the iPad closed and I had a keyboard on my lap, I could be looking straight at them while taking notes. Not in a creepy way, like you don't want to do it too much, like prolonged eye contact. But the fact that I was not like buried in my notes, that eye contact really matters, at least in my interviews. And so when someone makes a joke and you're able to laugh because you're actually in that moment with them, and the notes can kind of fade into the background, it's kind of a power move if you can pull it off. It's obviously very difficult. But that's been huge for me, is people realizing, oh, I'm just talking to a person right now. I'm not being like grilled. So that's, I don't know if I have 3, was that 3? Might have been 3. But yeah, that's what worked for me, is try to be human without being too rigid, and eye contact.
Fantastic, all great tips. Cool. So we have a question here from Ashleah. I hope that I pronounced that correctly. And her question, or their question, is: you spoke about resilience earlier, and that really stayed with me. As someone who's naturally curious, I've had moments where that curiosity led to burnout or self-doubt. How do you personally bounce back when things don't go as expected?
I'm not good at that. I'll just start there. And I think knowing your struggles goes a long way. I was just reading about a thing today that people on the spectrum, I forget the phrasing for it, but there's a concept of rejection dysmorphia or something like this, where criticism, nobody likes criticism. And then there are some people where criticism seems to hit them 10 times harder than like other people. And I was reading this article and it was saying like, it can help just to say out loud, this might be one of those moments where I'm taking this 10 times harder than most people. So yeah, I struggle with that a lot. And so I think the key is just like being kind to yourself, being self-aware, trying to get out of a mindset of like, what's wrong with you? And more into a mindset of, you are currently struggling with the following thing, and here are some techniques. Like trying to get into like problem solving mode and not so much like mode. So yeah, but it's tough. There's no sort of magic solution.
Cool. Thank you, Jon. Our next question is from Cafe Yi. Again, apologies if my pronunciation isn't correct. They ask, hi, Jon, what kind of things or won't be replaced by AI in the future in the UX field? Topical
You'll be
question.
unsurprised. Yeah, sorry. That's a great question. Thank you. You'll be unsurprised to hear that I get this question very frequently lately. That's maybe the most common thing that I hear. So here's my stock answer. Imagine a desert island, right? So there's water down here and there's a palm tree on the top or whatever. And now imagine the water level is rising. Okay. And you don't want it to go submerge. And so you want to hit higher ground. Okay. So think of that as the job market and think of AI as rising water. And so the question is, okay, how do I get up here? So the bottom thing down there is things like working at McDonald's, taking people's orders, because now we have the machines, right? So like that's already kind of submerged. So what's on the very top? The books that I've read about AI and what I've seen in my personal life is teaching people, hearing people, understanding people, anything that inspiring people, anything that has to do with like, everyone has 500 tabs open, everyone's overwhelmed, no one is getting their to-do list done every day, everyone's underwater, there's just a lot for everybody at all times. The ability to be a person who can listen well, so like I think of like a therapist in a more official setting, a person who can listen well and try to teach people what they've found, hopefully with like a calming, affect. Those are the sorts of things that I think, just like I was saying before about resilience, those are the sorts of jobs I think are going to really, stand out. Now, what does that have to do with design? Well, I think we have to be honest with ourselves that right now, anybody, your CEO, you can tell your CEO, well, that's going to take 3 months to really go do correctly. And your CEO can just go to an app right now and just be like, make me a new landing page that does the following thing. My designer says it'll take 3 months, and they're going to hit enter and they're going to get something that's actually not too bad. Like that exists today. And if you've all seen Jurassic Park, I've compared this moment where the CEO, you can no longer say no to the executives because now they're just prompting and making stuff on their own. I've compared it to in Jurassic Park when they realized that the dinosaurs could open doors. It's a whole new ball game when the dinosaurs can open doors. And now that you're CEO, I used to work at a startup and the CEO would get a shower thought. He'd be like, oh, we should do this. And the tech team would be like, no, because of technical debt. And the design team would be like, no, because we haven't researched it. And like everybody would have a reason to say no. But when he was able to just do this, like a velociraptor opening a door, whole new ball game. So we have to understand, like, look, everybody can make screens now. Like that already happened. So being the person that goes, cool, CEO, I see that you're excited, but then find a way to work with them. And not, designers have a bad reputation for just kind of being maybe a little bit grumpy when people get into the design area. So I think we're going to have to elegantly transition and understand that, look, a lot of screens are going to start coming our way. And we're going to have to explain why, in a world where anyone can make a screen, why we are valuable. And again, it goes back to all that other stuff that I said. Synthesizing a lot of different people's points of view, being able to teach people, being able to listen, all of that's going to be extremely valuable.
Fantastic answer. Thank you, Jon. A fantastic question has also just come through from Ravina, which is all about questions. Basically, how do you ask a good question?
Oh, wow. And also Ravina has another one from about 10 minutes ago that I want to make sure to get to as well. So Ravina, thank you for these questions. Keep them up. How do you ask good questions? I'm just going to be honest here and say, like, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Honestly, I think in my life, I have a bit of a reputation for not asking good questions. Honestly, I think when you go to a party and everyone's like, hey, how about the Seahawks? And you're like, yeah, they got a good, and everyone's talking about small talk. And then I'm going to do a little bit of stagecraft here, right? So imagine everyone's over here, like small talk, small talk, small talk. And then I'm like, I'm bored. Tell me about your deepest thoughts. It's just like, I don't think I ask good questions. I think I ask intense, deep questions because I get impatient. So yeah, but I'd say, like, I think the saving grace for me is, it'd be one thing if I was saying it in like a mean way where I'm like, I think people see that I just genuinely actually want to know what they're saying. And like that Jamba Juice guy that was confused by my question, but then kind of got rolling. The difference was that he really did see me like I actually wanted to know. And so I guess that's my only takeaway is, like, maybe don't be as intense as me, but if people sense that you actually care about the response and you're giving them eye contact and you're doing active listening, I think any question, it's not even about the question, right? It's actually the conversation you're about to have. So I would maybe even think of the question as not as important as the attitude you're bringing, that you genuinely are curious and would like to know. People like that. Oh, and on that note, my favorite book is the 100-year-old book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it has a bunch of tips in there about, like, just trying to be a nice person who, like, listens well. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So just genuine curiosity, I think is a good one. Just calling out that other question from Ravina that you mentioned. What are your top 3 tips for the next generation of designers? How can I, as a junior designer, use this superpower of understanding technology? How can that help me stay in the job market and sustain it?
Yeah, great question, Ravina, again. And I'll just say, like, let's just all be honest. The job market is really scary. It's really hard. I've been around a long time. I've never seen anything like this, so it's tough. So I just want to say, if anyone on this call is feeling a bit weirded out by the job market, like me too, it's a tough time. But I've lived through a lot of transitions. I watched people call the World Wide Web a fad. I watched people call things like streaming media. In fact, I worked at Real Networks. We did streaming media. I watched people call streaming media a fad. I saw them call Blackberries fads. I literally worked with a designer at Frog. She was proud of herself that she hadn't really learned much about digital design. She's like, I'm more, of a pen person. I'm like, okay. I watched people say that the iPhone would never take off. And here's what I see is like a lot of seats get opened up when old people say, I'm not learning mobile, I'm out of here. Or before that, I'm not making a website, I'm out of here. Or, I've seen it happen a lot. They leave, they like retire, or they burn out, or they leave. And that's when the young people with the change mindset come in. They're like, of course I'm using AI. Why wouldn't I use AI? There are a lot of people out there. To be clear, a lot of people hate AI, and I totally get where they're coming from. I don't mean to make it sound like it's this perfect thing and there's no issues. I see a thing down here about the ethical angles of AI, which we'll talk about in a second. So to be clear, AI has a lot of downsides, and I'm not trying to overlook it, but it's here. So if I'm interviewing 5 designers, and 3 of them are like, yeah, I'm trying not to use AI because I'm trying to keep it real. Like, guess what? They're not in the running. It would be like someone saying they're not going to learn how to use a Mac, or they're not going to learn how to make an app. It's just like, sorry, like it's here now. So I'd say the superpower for, knowing technology and being young is that you know the technology and you're young. So just dive in, try to learn as many things as you can, and understand that people like me, we're starting to lose steam, and you are going to replace us, and that's the circle of life.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that are in asking genuine questions, but it's a good reminder that no matter our age or stage, being curious for the world around us and is in general is a really valuable thing.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we're going to have to stop our questions there because we have got an exciting prize to give away. And that is the $50 gift card to the Figma store. So you've got some nice t-shirts and caps and pins and all the cool Figma merch that is available on that store. And now, John, you are going to choose the winner for us. Either from one of the ones you've already answered, or there are a couple that were still in there. But the thing is, it's your choice. While John is reading those through, refreshing his memory, I'm going to give him a moment. I just want to remind, if your name is, your question is picked as the winning question, please stay on the call. I feel like a radio DJ. Please stay on the line, and we'll get your details at the end of the call.
So what I want to say is, first, I feel very blessed that there were so many great questions, and I feel very seen, and I love it. And, thank you. They were genuinely all great. But because I think it's so important. This one down here about ethical AI, I think that has to win from the standpoint of like, we got to talk about that, right? I mean, AI is so, it's divisive. So how can I advocate for the responsible use of AI in design, especially when it genuinely supports my research and exploration process without facing judgment or pushback from those who are skeptical or opposed to AI? I've got a couple things to say about this. Number one, The environmental impact, I'm very happy to report, has been severely exaggerated. There was disinformation that went around that says every search query takes as much as a whole bottle of water. That's just inaccurate. Like that's not even close to true. They rescinded it, but nobody knows. You can do 10,000 ChatGPT queries for the equivalent of a single hamburger of water. So when you're like, oh, I'm using too much AI, if you eat a single hamburger, you've already done 10,000 queries. And when you look at carbon and energy use, I studied this for like 4 months. When you look at carbon and energy use, it's equivalent to approximately 3 minutes in an airplane. 10,000 queries, 3 minutes in an airplane. So if you've been in an airplane this year or you've eaten a hamburger, you can start with the idea that no, you are not. If you want to change environmental impact, there are a lot of ways to do it before you start looking at reducing ChatGPT. So that's the first thing. But can you say that to somebody who's feeling very upset about AI? Of course not. Like, you don't start there, right? That's just going to cause an argument. I think what I would say is, do not evangelize AI. Just do your job. You don't have to overly justify, but you certainly don't want to evangelize. Just do your job. If somebody says, oh, wow, like, this is good work, how did you do it? Like, you are welcome to mention that you were using AI. But I think like it is a very divisive topic, and people have every right to be upset. I didn't even talk about the ethical issues in the art world, which I have nothing to say about. I have no counter argument to the ethical issues with art. The ethical issues with art are very bad, and I don't have any talking points about that. But yeah, just keeping in mind that it's very divisive. You don't need to stir up a fight. You don't need to lead with AI. You certainly don't need to evangelize it. I would just kind of keep it off to the side unless someone asks, and then you can answer honestly. So yeah, those are some thoughts that I have about that.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jon. And thank you, Hiroshi, for your question as well. Please stay on the call. We'll grab your details. Fantastic. Oh, and just really quick back to Rachel, if you entered a question, or if you've still got a question bubbling in your mind, please feel free to pop it in the Q&A, and Jon will answer that later, and we'll post it on LinkedIn. And before I hand back to Rachel, just a friendly reminder to Jon about his tappy tappy.
Sorry.
That's okay. Back to you, Rach.
Thank you so much, Jon and Roxy, and everyone who's added to the chat and questions. It's been a really great session. So next up on the world tour, we're actually heading back across to Sydney. And this talk is about if you've ever wondered how to harness inconsistency across your experiences in a way to provide coherence and flexibility. This talk is for you. Richard and Tara from Atlassian are diving into our approach to design patterns, and they'll share the ins and outs, demo aspects in Figma, and share tips and tricks to take your design pattern from zero to hero. And if you haven't already registered, you can just follow that QR code there and it will take you to the sign up. Now, just a reminder that all these sessions are going to be recorded and they'll be available on YouTube, and we'll publish the links over social media in the next few days. So before we wrap up, we would love your feedback on the event. This feedback is for the world tour as a whole. And again, QR code, give it a scan, fill it out. It only takes 1 minute. We'd love to have your thoughts to make next year even better. This event is made possible by all of the Friends of Figma chapters around the world taking part. This is such a beautiful, diverse event, and it would have been impossible alone. Incredible things really can happen when people come together to work together as a team. So on that note, we're going to sign off from Wellington now. Ka kite anō, and see you all in Sydney.